Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Dear listener, welcome to Kardec Radio. Today we're feeling like the ancient apprentices of the best teachers. We are honored to have here in the show today with us Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. And you'll be surprised if you didn't know of it, but besides being the leading authority on the science of near-death experiences, but he's also a PhD on the philosophy of Plato. Did you know that Plato had great ideas that also were very spiritual per se? In Spiritism, we even say that he was one of the forerunners of the Spiritist ideas, the Christian ideas, and the best ethical spiritual ideas on the earth. I know you want to know more. We do too, and that's why we are honored to have here with us one of the few in this planet that really know deeply about these spiritual ideas that Plato can bring to us and really transformed a lot of things on the planet. We'll discuss more about it, and you're invited to call in and ask Dr. Moody Jr. Your questions. Just call 858-769-4705, and or also go to our chat room at blogtalkradio.com/Kardec Radio, and we're live here from Chantilly, Virginia, and we are here to nourish your soul. We have a lot to share with you, sharing so much that in a week we're going to come here with the winner of Kardec Radio Challenge, and it's going to be an opportunity for that person to come to the show and tell us what is the difference between desiring for others what we desire for ourselves, or desiring for ourselves what we desire for others. Is there a difference? How deeply can that change our lives? By the way, we want to share with you that Divaldo Franco, the great medium, speaker, humanitarian, and also ambassador of peace, who in 2006 had a great event with Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. in Baltimore, Maryland. Divaldo Franco is going to be here in the United States this year, starting March 3rd. He's going to be in Florida March 3rd and 4th in a great event, and you can go to the website of the Florida Spiritist Federation to know more about the information on the event. Also, March 5th, he's going to be in Atlanta talking about the planetary transition. On March 6th, he's going to be in New York giving a special lecture at the United Nations on mediumship. On March 7th, he's going to be in Connecticut, and the talk is going to be The Messiah. On March 8th, he's going to be in New Jersey to talk about planetary transition. March 9th, he's going to be in Maryland to talk about planetary transition. March 10th, he's going to be in Boston, Massachusetts, to talk about his latest book, The Psychology of Gratitude. If you want to know more about these details, write to Kardec Radio at kardecradio@gmail.com, and we'll share the links of the specific places and locations where Divaldo Franco is going to be in. Well, soon after our break, we're going to have here with us Dr. Moody Jr. talking to us about the very Plato and his philosophy and the spiritual ideas. Did you know that Plato was one of the spirit entities who helped the mediums at Kardec time outline the Spiritist codification? Yes, he was. Open the Spirit book in the first section, Prolegomena, entitled Prolegomena, and you see the signature of one of the many spirits that actually did that. And when we go to the Gospel according to Spiritism in its introduction, we have Kardec outlining him, the very Plato, as one of the forerunners of the Spiritist and Christian ideas in this world. Quite amazing. And when we go to the end of the Spirit's book, question 1009, Kardec was asking several entities through several different mediums about this question that we always have in our minds as well, which is about this eternal punishment. Does it exist? And Plato was one of the spirits who came through a medium, and the spirit of Plato, and came besides many other things, which is quite fascinating, his style, the way he addresses it. At the very end, he says, eternal punishment? How could that be if we believe that evil was also eternal? But only God is eternal, and God could not have created eternal evil. If such were the case, we would have to deny one of the most beautiful divine attributes, supreme power, for God would cease to be supremely powerful the moment God introduced the destructive element into creation. Humanity, no longer immerse your somber glance into the depths of the earth, searching for these punishments. Weep, hope, atone, and take comfort in the thought of a God that is infinitely good, absolutely powerful, and essentially just. This is the spirit of Plato at Kardec's time. Through a medium, bringing to us in one of the answers to question 1009 of the Spirit's book, the fascinating spiritual idea that God is supremely just, good, and absolutely powerful. Well, this is just a teaser for us because there's so much more. We want to know from a scholar such as Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. Who is Plato? Why did he impact so much our lives on the earth and still does? About his ideas and the striking aspect of spirituality that we can also extrapolate from his teachings. Well, dear listener, it's all about this critical thinking that we want to bring to Kardec Radio to nourish our souls and also to bring deep consolation. By the way, if you are in London, England, in this week, we're going to have at Queen Mary University the first Lusophonic Spiritist Film Festival, organized by Professor Elsie Vieira, coordinated by the chairman of the British Union of Spiritist Societies, Mrs. Elsa Rossi, and her team. They are going to screen several Spiritist movies that became blockbusters, especially in Brazil, and amazing books as well. And you're invited to get to know more about this, which is going to be a week-long event from February 21st to the 25th. Just go to www.buss.org and get to know more about it. There are many good things happening around the world. We just need to connect with them to feel the joy of the moments of the transformation on the earth, and to kickstart this critical thinking and consoling mindset. We're going to open with a message from Joana de Angelis through Divaldo Franco in the book and CD, Living and Loving. It's entitled Doubt and Failure.
Chapter 16, Doubt and Failure.
To doubt is a healthy attitude when we seek a better understanding of the causes of things and situations. In scientific investigation, for instance, to doubt is a necessity until the findings are proved right. Schools of thought usually start with questioning in order to reach for new concepts and expanded information. Systematic doubt, however, expresses an imbalance of reason and generates emotional problems. As far as spiritual realities are concerned, no laboratory experiment has been able to prove that there is no intelligent life after death. On the other hand, there are facts that assert spirit survival to bodily death and its pre-existence to birth. Unstable people try to shun their assumed duties, excusing themselves with doubt, and do not care to persist in the search for spirit reality. A patient who doubts his own cure corrodes his mind with pessimistic thoughts and destroys the very elements which would promote health. Consequently, his pathological condition aggravates regardless of proper clinical treatment. A fighter who doubts his victory loses the combat before it starts. The farmer who doubts the potential in the seed and behaves carelessly will not see his plantation flourish. A business person who doubts the success of his trade gets easily discouraged and will certainly be disheartened by failure. Sometimes, doubt is an attitude of self-accommodation. The person tries to ignore new ideas and facts to avoid the need to change his way of living. Spiritual life and the interference of the dead in the activities of the living are realities taught by all ancient civilizations. The Spiritist doctrine, a legitimate heir to Christ's thoughts, has brought the essence of these teachings back without allegory, deception, or distortion. When confronted with problems of faith and behavior, examine critically the opinions presented to you. Then study the teachings of the Spiritist doctrine to be able to discern more clearly. The laws of God are perfect, His providence merciful. Nobody is forgotten or spiritually orphaned. Liberate yourself from the petty conflicts of systematic doubt. A rational belief will open up new horizons for you. Doubt and disbelief generate great suffering. Remember what Jesus told the Apostle Thomas, who was doubtful whether the Master had really returned from the dead. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org. The newest edition of the Medium's Book by Allan Kardec is now available. Purchase your copy online or via your ebook reader. Simply go to www.ediciofamerica.com today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday live. Evolution in Two Worlds. A journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, Andrea Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Available for purchase the book, This Obsession, psychographed by the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier. In this book, the spirit André Luiz recruits new groups of workers of goodness whose intent is to aid in the readjustment of those no longer in the physical plane. Learn more by purchasing your copy at www.sgny.org.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we are here to talk about the spiritual ideas of Plato. There is so much. Today we invite you to the classroom of Athens in Greece, feeling like the apprentices of great minds, Plato's mind, Socrates' mind, and Dr. Raimundo Jr.'s mind. But before we open the line in a few minutes, we have here with us our friend Manuel de la Cruz, who is one of the main organizers of this International Spiritist meeting, which is the 7th World Meeting in the modern times, organized also by the International Spiritist Council. The meeting is going to happen March 23rd, 24th, and 25th in Havana, Cuba, next year. So, Manuel, thank you so much for being here with us at Kardec Radio.
Thank you, Vanessa, for inviting me to this beautiful program.
Manuel, we're so joyful to know that this meeting is going to be in Cuba, and it's actually the first time that there is an international meeting there in Spiritism, right?
Yes, this will be the big one. This is gonna be we call the end because we already have 3 previous big meetings for the first time after more than 20 years of working very hard with with everything over there in Cuba. It's a little more difficult than other countries. But now it's opening, the government is opening the opportunity to have all these kind of meetings. We apply on the International Spirit Council that we want to have the 7th Congress in Cuba, and we win. We win this opportunity. We are very, very happy to have this because, in Cuba right now we have more than 500 spiritual houses there,
All right. And what's fascinating to know is that working that hard, you got great acceptance and also approval, as you said, from the government and especially from the minister, because they have the Ministry of Religion there, right?
Yes. Actually, we have a very good relationship with them. They have been so beautiful with us because every time that we ask them for, organize something, we need to go to the other cities of the country, and they open the doors. We celebrate there the 6th Central America Congress over there on April. What's beautiful, excellent. They give you all the things that you need in order to accomplish this event.
Great.
So I think it's the only country that the government is helping on this,
Exactly. And the meeting theme is going to be charity and spiritual education. How interesting and inspiration can that be? Are they excited about it?
They are excited about it because actually that's the main thing over there, the education. Cuba has a long history in spiritism, but they really need education because so many years we have any books, anything, and actually we have 2 big donations already since last year. We offered to them around 14,000 books the first time, and then another 14,000.
Wow.
So, it's a big donation that we offer to all Spirit Center over there, and everybody is so happy at this time, because they didn't have the opportunity to have all these books. They have the codification completely, and plus Chico Javier books, and it's a very good challenge that we have because it's after so many years, because Cuba is not new in the spiritism. It's not new. The first Congress was in Barcelona, Spain. The big crowd from Cuba went there for the first time.
All right.
So we are so happy, and all the conference that we would have there was excellent, and you are inviting over there. So
I know.
You want to have the opportunity to be with the Cuban people.
So, Manuel, we are going to invite you to come every other week until the meeting to come and tell us a little bit more. So, in 2 weeks, please come back and tell us more about the program. The speakers are invited to give lectures in those 3 days. And so we get to know more about the beautiful organization. And for people now, if they want to register for the meeting, they just need to go to the website.
www.7cem.org, and you have all the information there. And as soon as we have more information, I'm going to advise you guys every time, because Americans need to know exactly that they don't want to have any problem to travel to Cuba.
That's great. We're going to talk about it in 2 weeks. And thank you so much for being with us at Kardec Radio today, Manuel.
Thank you for the big opportunity, okay?
All right. We'll talk to you soon. So, dear listener, here you are. You see, the world is changing. It's progressing. Things are really moving along, and there is so much ahead of us to do, to understand. And as Joana de Angelis said before, there's a lot of need in regard to this exercise of critical thinking, and that's why today we're bringing to the show the very special guest, Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. He's coming back again, but this time it's another feature of his knowledge. It's about his expertise on the philosophy of Plato. You know, Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. is the best-selling author of 12 books, including the Great Life After Life and Reunions. He is an award-winning author for his humanitarian work. He also is a world-renowned scholar and researcher on near-death experiences. He got his MD from Medical College of Georgia in 1976. He got his master's and PhD in philosophy from the University of Virginia between the years 1967-1969. He also got honors in philosophy from the University of Virginia in 1966. So he's a dynamic lecturer. He's been to Baltimore in a Spiritist event with Evaldo Franco in 2006. He's also an expert trainer and instructor. He has been featured in the media 3 times on Oprah and several other times at Grief Recovery at NBC Today, ABC's Turning Point, several other shows. He's a private counselor. He offers personal consultations. And today, we want to learn more from him about the great mind of Plato. So we now have here with us Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. Hi, Dr. Moody Jr. Thank you so much for joining us again at Kardec Radio.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on your program again. I really have enjoyed our time we had before, and this is delightful to continue our conversation.
Dr. Moody, we really feel as if we were in those real good times of the master and the apprentices in Athens. When we talk about Plato and Socrates, don't we go back to the root of human knowledge on our planet? Who was Plato?
Well, what a wonderful question, because I have had the honor of teaching Plato at universities for over 30 times. And I love to introduce my young students to this amazing character, because sadly, in the United States, the classical model of education has been abandoned to the detriment of the young people who are coming along. And so I found that when you go into a university and you teach a course in Plato, many times the kids are there just because they have to take a course in philosophy. And really, in reality, to them, the name Plato just hits with a dull thud. I can just see them rolling their eyes and saying, oh, no, I'm going to have to read Plato. And so I only have a window of a time or two, and the classes to get their attention and to turn them around. So what I do is this. I say, first of all, that this man wasn't even really named Plato. His name was Aristocles. And I tell them that the name Plato was his ring name. Plato was a professional wrestler. Now, he was pretty good in this sport, too, and the story is that he won 2 gold medals at the Olympic Games in the sport of wrestling. And also, there's another thing to keep in mind here, that wrestling in the Greek world was quite a lot more rugged sport than we have today. And, for example, at times it was a perfectly legal move in ancient Greek wrestling to break your opponent's fingers. Now, if you look at Plato's surviving writings on the shelf, it's a huge volume, a big volume of fine print. And that's what the works of his that have survived from the ancient world. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it for a minute, that means that if he was going to write all that material, he also had to be a pretty good wrestler. Mm-hmm. And another thing I bring to my students' attention about this man was that he founded the university system. You know, if we were transported back to Athens in a time machine at the time of Plato, and we walked onto the grounds of Plato's academy, we would recognize it as a university. He set the model for all times for universities when he created this institution. The way he did it was that he had been a student of Socrates, and Socrates was executed, as we all know, by the hemlock poison. And Plato was a fairly young man about that time. I believe, as I recall, he was about 26 years of age at the time. And this was a devastating event to him. And he then subsequently to that, he underwent what I think in modern terms would call a midlife crisis, and went away. He did some traveling, and when he came back to Athens, he determined, as many people do in midlife, you know, what they try to do is they try to create something that will benefit the coming generations. So Plato, who came from a wealthy family, purchased a property which already existed just sort of outside of Athens, and there were places where he could use buildings that he could use as a gymnasium, which actually still is in the university today. But in the ancient university, it was far more a central part than in universities today. A gymnasium, room for a library, for lecture halls, no doubt for a cafeteria and professors' offices. And he created there the first university. And he plainly had in mind bequeathing this institution to posterity, and probably had in mind that this would just be a permanent institution, as it has turned out to be. You know, when he dedicated this institution to a certain view of knowledge, Socrates was very impressive in his performances of being able to ask a few questions and enable people to see that they weren't as smart as they thought they were. He would ask them to give him a definition for some quality such as courage, for example. And he would very quickly see that even people who were popularly reputed to be courageous would be tripping all over themselves and not being able to put into words very clearly what courage is. So he went around and he did this, and he found in his quest that the people who were popularly reputed to be wise, or who thought they were wise, really didn't know what they were talking about. And this came in the context that some time before the oracle at Delphi had pronounced that no person is wiser than Socrates. So when this information got back to Socrates, he was very puzzled, because he had always thought of himself as a very ignorant person. So we went on this quest to ask people what wisdom was, or to try to find out what wisdom is, by asking all the reputedly wise people in Athens. And what he found was that they really didn't know what they were talking about. So thinking about all this, he said, well, the oracle says that I'm the wisest man, but I don't feel wise at all. But as I go around and I interview all these people who think they're wise and who make a show of it, I find that they're really not wise at all, that they think they know, but they don't really know. And so he said, but me, I know, I don't know, but I know that I don't know. And he said, and that must be how I'm different from these other people. They think that they know, but they don't really know. I don't know, but I know that I don't know. Therefore, wisdom must consist in knowing that you don't know. And he felt that was the sense in which he was wiser than anybody else, that he knew that he didn't know. And this was the slogan or motto of academia as Plato set it out for us. And one really interesting thing, and I think one of the most fascinating facts about ancient Greek philosophy, which, as you know, is the ancient Greek philosophers set the structure for all the other disciplines that have followed. All rational knowledge begins with these ancient Greek philosophers. And it is fascinating and actually sensational information that these early Greek philosophers knew all about this process of calling up the spirits of the deceased. As a matter of fact, it's very plain just by reading Plato's Apology, which is the document in which he records Socrates' trial. It becomes very obvious in reading that material that the reason why Socrates was put to death was that people thought that he experimented with out-of-body travel and with calling up the spirits of the deceased. You can see this very clearly, for example, in the play The Birds by the great Athenian comic playwright Aristophanes. To this day, Aristophanes, who was a contemporary of Socrates, to this day, Aristophanes is one of the funniest people who ever wrote. And even now, his plays are just hilarious. And in one of his plays, The Birds in this play are describing some of the sights that they have seen as they've flown around the Greek world. And at one point, they say, "Far away in Webfoot land at the swamp of dismal dread, there we saw foul Socrates come calling up the dead." And what this is about is poking fun at Socrates by claiming that Socrates was associated with these rites at the so-called oracles of the dead, or psychomantions. And as I'm sure you know, the ancient Greeks had these institutions called oracles of the dead, in which people could go and they would go through certain procedures during which they would seem to see and converse with the spirits of their departed relatives. This is very well recorded in the ancient Greek historians and the Odyssey of Homer, and many of the classical writers describe these oracles of the dead, including Plutarch and Herodotus, the great historians. And apparently, numerous of these early philosophers did participate in this kind of procedure. And whether we don't really know whether Socrates himself did, or whether Aristophanes was just making fun of him by falsely claiming that. But I myself think it's entirely possible that Socrates, when he was a young man and an inquiring mind, could well have participated in this. I don't think it's unlikely at all.
So it's such a beautiful introduction to him. And as you said, our educational system today really needs a shift. And to go back to one of the elements that you brought in for our listener to have a reference. So Plato lived in the 400s BCE, and he was also an Athenian citizen of high status, right?
He was. Plato was an ancestor of the great statesman Solon, who, of course, is still remembered. And, even to this day, we call legislators, when they are very wise and just people, we call them Solons. and that is to honor Plato's ancestor Solon, the great Athenian statesman.
But Dr. Moody Jr., when we talk about Plato and Socrates, and, for us today, it's so easy to write whatever. Everybody has some form of access to pens and pencils and computers and iPads, iPhones. You can even write your poetry on your own iPhone if you want. But at his time, to know how to write was something of a few minds, right?
That's correct. By the time of Plato, there was a large literate class, and many people were educated, but alphabetic writing came into Greece roughly, say, around 750 to 700 BCE. And, of course, as you say, it took some time to take hold, because if you think about it, initially, the people who were able to write would want to keep the secret to themselves, right? Because it would be an advantage to be able to write, a great advantage to be able to write when nobody else could do it. So initially, as you say, writing was very limited, only to a very few people, and then it became more prevalent and more prevalent over the centuries. And actually, one startling fact is that by the time that Plato came around, there were actually bookstores in Athens. They had scribes, of course, who would reproduce these writings, and so there were bookstores in Athens by the time that Plato was flourishing. But this was, as you say, a very, very slow process. Initially, the first written works were not written for reading by yourself at home, as we have books today. At the very early times, since so few people wrote or could read, the writings were made for oral performance. That is, that somebody would write something else, and then somebody else who could read would read it in public. People who were not literate. And incidentally, Plato himself was not entirely entirely on board with writing. He loved writing, and he was obviously a great writer. But still, to him, the most important way of transmitting information from person to person was by the spoken word. And he says at one point, he says, in one of his letters, he said, there never will be any philosophical treatises under the name of Plato. He said, such as there are just the words and thoughts of a Socrates grown suddenly young and beautiful. And what he meant by that was that his dialogues, which are kind of cast as conversations, usually between Socrates and some other people who are conversing with Socrates. But Plato made the very interesting point about writing, that after we start writing, then we lose our memories. You know, they say that if you went back in a time machine to the ancient world, you would be astonished to see how people's memories were. That it would seem to us almost supernatural, the ability that people had to remember things. And what that's all about is, think of it this way. Let's say you lived in a pre-literate culture and you lived in a farm outside of the city, and maybe once a year you would go into the city for your supplies. The question that you could ask is, well, how in the world would they remember all the things that they needed to purchase in the city? You see, only going in once a year. Well, the way they did it was that ancient people had this institution known as memory theaters, and it worked like this. Obviously, everybody in a society would know a certain big public building by heart, For example, obviously, if you think about it, for example, there would be the city hall in the city, of course, that everybody would have to go to pay their taxes or get their business done, and so on. So everybody had a mental map of the big city hall or whatever memorized. And so when they were making their list, they would say, well, I'll put the 2 barrels of flour in the foyer of the city hall. And then I know that down the hall on the left, there's the tax assessor's office. So I'll put the 4 barrels of wine I want to purchase in the tax assessor's office. And then go down further, there's the property records office. And I will put the nails I need in that office, and so on. And by that way, when they went, they could work all this out before they went on their trip. Then when they went to the city, they would just go through their mental map and pick out all the items that they wanted. And so to us, you see, our memories are not trained like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so Plato expressed a certain amount of regret that with the invention of writing, we were no longer able to remember as well as we used to be, because writing effectively did away with the need to memorize things in that way. You could just write them down instead of going through the mental effort of creating that mental map in your mind.
Dr. Moody, we have so many interesting questions to ask you in regard to Plato, Socrates, and the ideas, and especially some of the aspects that you have already highlighted for us. But we're going to give a short break and be right back with you, okay? So,
we will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Now available for purchase, the book Chico Xavier, Medium of the Century by Guy Léon Playfair. This is the first biographical and critical study in English of one of the outstanding mediums of all time, through whom more than 450 books were received by automatic writing over a 70-year period, few of which until recently were available in English translations. Purchase your copy today at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com.
The newest edition of the Medium's book by Allan Kardec is now available. Purchase your copy online or via your ebook reader. Simply go to www.ediciofamerica.com today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday live. Evolution in Two Worlds. A journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, Andrea Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone, the online study of the Spirit's Book and the Gospel according to Spiritism. Spiritism for Everyone meets every Wednesday evening and Saturday morning using the latest technology in web conferencing. You can join in from any computer in the comfort of your home or office, no matter where you are in the U.S. or the world. Spiritism for Everyone is open, free, and requires no registration. To access the web live meetings, go to www.spiritus.us. Spiritism for Everyone is a program of the United States Spiritist Council.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, do you want to ask a question to Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. about the spiritual ideas of Plato? Just call us at 858-769-4705. Kirsten DeMello is here on the screen room to talk to you before we bring you on air so you can comfortably come and talk to Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. You know, we are talking here about Plato. Dr. Moody Jr., one of the things that came to mind was being somebody who was from the elite society in Athens at the time, very privileged in so many ways, socio-economically speaking. But not only that, in his own mind, in his, let's say, genetic heritage that provided him with this differential critical thinking. Why did Plato, in your mind, in your idea, became foundational for knowledge in humanity and on the earth?
You know, that is a very difficult question to answer, and obviously I have thought about this since I first became a fan of Plato when I was 18 years old in 1962.
That's quite unique.
Yes, and it really does seem just unbelievable that there could have been such a person. I think, you know, besides his utter talent, he was just a very brilliant man, obviously, but also a great writer. He is one of the greatest writers who ever lived, and even now his prose in Greek is just so engaging. I mean, why else would his work still be in print after 2,300 years?
Mm-hmm.
And there is no question also that he absolutely was a deeply spiritual person. The spiritual life was far more important for Plato than the world of physical objects and physical processes. As a matter of fact, to Plato, the world that we see before our eyes, the world of flux and flow and material substance in which things are constantly shifting and constantly changing, for Plato had only a kind of secondary reality. For Plato, knowledge pertained, which was what he was after, knowledge, right? To him, that was the most important thing to know. And as he thought about it, he thought, well, when you look at the objects that seem to present themselves to us in the physical world, they can't really be objects of knowledge. Now, let me give you an example that would show that. Plato says that one of the things that we all absolutely know, I'm sure everyone listening to this knows for sure, that a circle is a plane geometrical figure, every point on the circumference of which is equidistant from the center. That is a matter of rock-hard, solid knowledge. We don't know anything more clearly and more certainly than we know that. And Plato often also felt that just by definition, just by thinking about it, knowledge has to be something certain and unmovable and unchangeable. If we really know it, then that is solid, unchangeable, fixed information. And yet, Plato said, paradoxically, if we think about it, we can quickly realize that we have never in our lives here in this world seen a circle. Because let's take, for example, the top of your coffee cup and look at it. At one level, you say that's a circle, okay, and that impresses you as a circle. However, you don't have to get very sophisticated equipment at all. You could just get a simple gadget known as a micrometer, and you could measure that top of the coffee cup, and you would see that it is by no means really circular, that the edges are very uneven, and that almost every point on the end of the on the circumference is actually a different length from the center. And yet that doesn't impugn or interfere with in any way our certain knowledge of what a circle is. So Plato said that the things that we see in the physical world are only pale imitations, and that the circle we know of, that we have that sure and certain idea of a circle immovably in our minds, that we've never really seen one of those. Everything that we see in the world and call analogously a circle doesn't really measure up to that ideal circle. And yet we have nonetheless completely certain knowledge of that circle. And so therefore, Plato said, the verities, those things that actually do exist, are intelligible only. That is, we can only arrive at the knowledge of what a circle is by our intellect. And he said that these entities of our knowledge have an independent existence quite apart from the physical world, that we can only learn about them. We can only we can only become aware of them, you see, through our intellect. And that the sense perceptions are misleading. Our senses are always misleading us away from true knowledge. True knowledge only comes to us through our intellect.
Wow. You know, it makes me feel, Dr. Moody Jr., that if today, besides great minds like yours and other scholars that we have on the earth, at his time, it's likely that people, majority of them, were, away or distracted for the survival needs because their life was much harder at the time. And his mind was really striking. Bringing Plato today would make such a difference to the world even today, imagine at the time. So difference between the common people and a mind like his. And especially, do you think his difference was also caused for the fact that he had the great teacher, Socrates, as well?
Yes, I think he had his wonderful teacher, Socrates, no doubt had to do with it. The fact that there had been a tradition by the time of Plato of a couple of 100 years in which these great thinkers before him had contributed all these things. Another person in this lineage that I'm sure you and our listeners would love to hear about is the great Parmenides, who was the ancient Greek philosopher around 500 BC, who articulated the notion of truth. And in his day job, so to speak, he was an evoker of the dead. I noticed you used the word a while ago. I think you said spirit doctor. Well, Parmenides was known by his contemporaries as Iatromantis, I believe was the name, which translates very nicely to spirit doctor. And he lived in the ancient Greek city of Alia, which was on the southern Italian mainland. You know, at that period, the Greeks had city-states also down in southern Italy and over on the east coast of what is now, or the west coast of what is now Turkey. And so it was slightly bigger than the Greek world we think of now. But in this city of Alia, which was a Greek city-state, as I mentioned, there was one of these oracles of the dead, and Parmenides worked there, and he would, in his work, he would lie in a cave, stock still, and would have inner adventures during which he would cross over to the other world and visit the other side. And during one of his visits to the other side, he met a goddess who revealed to him what we call deduction today, or deductive logic. She sang him this song, which is the very first surviving written out logical deduction, still quite valid today when you read it. And she gave him this deduction, and she said, Parmenides, when you go back to Earth, don't tell people to believe this because the goddess says so. Tell them to work it out in their own minds and see it for themselves. Mm-hmm. So he took this song back, and he instructed his students to sing it over and over until they learned it by heart. And when they did, they would have this epiphany in which it would dawn on them that some things are the case independently of what anybody happens to think about it, and that is the notion of truth. Going back to what we said earlier in talking about the pre-literate world, in a pre-literate world, people can't formulate the notion of truth. It's too abstract for them. And the reason is this, that what truth means is, truth is that which is the case independently of what any person, any individual person may think or feel or believe about it. And that idea is too abstract for people to have in a pre-literate world. And the reason is this. A deductive argument is like the argument A is taller than B is one premise. The second premise is B is taller than C. And the conclusion is A is taller than C. If you work out that in your mind, you will see that it's the case. If the two premises are A is taller than B and B is taller than C, then the conclusion is A is taller than C. And it doesn't matter what anybody may think. If those premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. But that was too abstract for people to realize before they could write things down. But when they started writing things down in about, say, 700 B.C., then they could look at the page and they could see, now just a minute here, if this here is and this here is also then this here must be But where we have the word true, they had no word. There was a gap in the ancient Greek vocabulary and no sense of the distinction that it portrayed. But once people could write that down, they could see it for themselves. And that's what Parmenides brought back from the ancient world, that when they sang this song over and over and they saw the necessary connection between the premises and the conclusion, it would dawn on them, aha, that it doesn't matter, that is the case no matter what anybody thinks. And that was the origin, you see, of the notion of truth. And the very strange and yet completely certifiable knowledge that comes from this is that logic itself came here from the other side. So you see, Plato already had this tradition. He of course had read the works of Parmenides. As a matter of fact, he even wrote one of his best dialogues about this Parmenides and so on. So there was that rich tradition in the background. And yet, with all of that, Plato was a man unique in his talents, and he obviously was a very kind man. There's a story recorded in one of the historians of these early philosophers about how Plato one time went to the Olympic Games, and when he was there, he met up with these people who were from some other city, and they all, just fell into a group and started talking, and these people really loved this guy Plato, and they thought, oh, what a wonderful man. So they sort of hung out together throughout their time at the Olympic Games. And so then when the games were over and they went back to their native city, as we do today, they all exchange addresses and so on. And if you're ever in wherever, please come by to see me and so on, just as we do today. Well, some while later, some time passed, and then a couple of years later or whatever, these people who had met Plato had occasion that they had to go to Athens. So when they were there, they decided to go and to look up this wonderful man, Plato, that they had this delightful encounter with when they were at the Olympic Games. So they found Plato, and he was a wonderful host to them, and he entertained them at his home, and he was just such a delightful host. So after several days, and they had gotten accustomed to his warmth and his hospitality, they kind of brought up one thing they would really like to do, and they said, "Sir, we don't want to impose on you and so on, but do you think that there's any way that as long as we are here in Athens, we could be introduced to the great Plato?"
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they hadn't realized that this very kind and warm and down-to-earth man that they met was the great Plato. They just thought it was some other person by the same name. So that shows how modest he was. I mean, in many ways, he was just a thoroughly delightful person. And yes, he was very much influenced in his life, as you said, by Socrates, but he was also influenced in his life by his greatest student, who was Aristotle. Aristotle came at the age of 17 to Athens to study and to be a student at the Plato's Academy, which by that time was up and running, and very quickly distinguished himself and attracted Plato's attention. And as a matter of fact, Plato's nickname for Aristotle was apparently the brain. He thought very highly of Aristotle's intellectual accomplishments, and no doubt Aristotle's thought influenced Plato too. It was definitely an interactive thing among all these people. They cross-influenced each other, I think.
Wow. It feels like what a combination. The master, the disciple, and then the apprentice of his. Great minds, and it reminds us, as you were saying, about this teaching of humility that Socrates taught very well. And then as Kardec places in the introduction of the Gospel According to Spiritism, when he quotes Plato, as he completes Socrates' thought, he says, let us first try to render the people who criticize us them more honest in words, if possible. If not, let us not concern ourselves with them. Let us seek nothing but the truth. Let us endeavor to educate ourselves, but not to offend each other. This is a quote that Kardec places in the Gospel According to Spiritism. Dr. Moody, we're going to give a very short break, and when we come back, we already have a listener. Mark from Seattle is here to ask a question about Plato and his concept on reincarnation. We'll be right back with you.
We will return to our program after these messages.
For the first time ever, the book Between Heaven and Earth by the spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier, is now in English. This is a novel that offers information about the relationship that exists in the activities of the spirit on the two planes of life. Purchase your copy today at www.edysayofamerica.com. Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.edysayofamerica.com today.
Come and enjoy the 5th Spiritist Society of Baltimore Forum entitled Honoring Life, which will take place on February 18th from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore headquarters, where topics such as abortion, death penalty, collective karma, and much more will be discussed. For more information, go to www.ssbaltimore.org.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, we're talking here with Dr. Raymond Moody Jr., learning a lot. We're inviting you to go back in time to one of the best parts of human knowledge on the earth, ancient Greece and the great minds of Socrates, and mainly Plato, and also Aristotle's There is a lot to learn, and we would like to remind you before we get back to Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. that this coming week, if you're in London, England, go to Queen Mary University of London for the first Lusophonic Spiritualist Film Festival, organized by Professor Elsie Vieira, and the event is coordinated by Elsa Rossi and her team on the British Union of Spiritist Societies, and the curators are Oceano Vieira de Mello and Paulo Rufino. They are going to screen the movie Allan Kardec, No Solar, Psychograph Letters by Chico Xavier, Bezerra de Menezes' Spiritual Journey, Divaldo Franco, Humanitarian Spiritist Medium, The Medium's Mother, The Great Synthesis of Pietro Ubaldi, The Spirits Film, Euripides Barçanufo, Educator and Medium, Chico Xavier, and lots of, it's also a book fair. So if you want more information, please go to www.buss.org and get to know more about the information. Dear listener, we are here delighted to know, and we need to rescue this information about the men, the women, the minds on the human earth that really created a solid foundation for human knowledge, without which our science today wouldn't be what it is. We are heirs of Plato, Socrates, and many more. Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. is a scholar on the philosophy of Plato, and he's here telling a lot of things that actually we didn't know. And he's going to now go deeper on the spiritual ideas of Plato, as we also find in Kardec's observations in the introduction of the Gospel according to Spiritism. And we have here with us our listener, Mark, from Seattle, who is here to ask Dr. Raymond Moody Jr. about Plato's spiritual ideas. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us at Kardec Radio today.
Well, good morning.
Hi, Mark. So you're in Seattle, Washington?
That's correct.
All right. So would you like to ask Dr. Moody Jr. a question?
Yes. Hello, Mark.
Sure.
How are you?
Hello, Dr. Moody. Yeah, I've heard you on Coast to Coast recently, and I missed a show you were at with, I guess, a medium named Joseph Tuttle. I guess you have a new book out.
Oh, yes,
Paranormal.
The Paranormal, my new book, The Paranormal, and it's just published, and it's about my life studying these phenomena. And in this book, The Paranormal, which has just been published, I do discuss Plato and some of these very things that we're talking about here, because really he has been my inspiration in my intellectual life, literally since I was 18 years old. I went to the University of Virginia actually planning to be an astronomy major, but I was interested in philosophy, and in my first philosophy class, reading Plato's Republic, I absolutely was just blown away, and I knew at that moment that I would be a philosophy major. So, the book you mentioned, The Paranormal, that just came out, and it's all about my early encounter with this amazing man and where it has led me in my life.
Well, that's quite interesting, Dr. Moody Jr. And we would recommend people can buy it at Amazon.com, right?
Yes, thank you. And what was your question, Mark?
Well, I read your book Coming Back a few years ago, and then I got the paperback last summer. I just noticed just now that you have it on a Kindle version. The Kindle version must have come out just after I got the paperback. Anyway, just for the sample, yes. You list 9 lives, but basically why I called was that, Plato had some ideas on reincarnation. I guess also Pythagoras had too. So I was wondering, there's some basic Greek ideas of reincarnation that might compare to like Hindu notions or Buddhist notions?
Oh, yes, and thank you for that question, and absolutely. I think that there's a kind of popular myth that I hear all the time that somehow interest in reincarnation didn't emerge in the Western world until the 19th century, or some even say the 20th century, but that's just not correct. As you mentioned there, Pythagoras was a believer in reincarnation, and Pythagoras actually claimed to remember 8 of his past lives. And similarly, Plato discusses reincarnation both in his book The Republic and also in his book The Phaedo, Phaedo, in which his most mature and interesting thought about the question of life after death is discussed. And Plato was very much a reincarnationist, and incidentally, Plato was also a pioneer in the rational investigation of near-death experiences. The end of the Republic recounts a very dramatic near-death experience that took place to a soldier named who was believed dead on the battlefield, but during his funeral spontaneously revived and talked to his friends about leaving his body and going through entranceways into another world where he saw his life reviewed. And he saw, in his vision of the other side, he saw souls kind of lining up to return, to come back to this world for reincarnation. And Plato elaborates in detail about reincarnation and how the life we lead while we're here kind of helps determine how we're going to be reincarnated in the future. And I believe that, now first of all, I've got to admit I don't know much about Hinduism, but insofar as the very little bit of information that I do have about Hinduism suggests to me that there is at least a superficially similar thing in Hinduism, that there is this tendency of us to be reborn into lives that somehow are influenced by what we have done in our present life. So I do believe that there is that sort of connection, and I think the case of Plato and Pythagoras shows very clearly that actually reincarnation was very much present, even at the beginnings of Western culture and society.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show and bringing this consideration to help us meditate more deeply with Dr. Moody Jr. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa and Dr. Moody.
Thank you, Mark.
Dr. Moody, that's so interesting. As you are now getting deeper to the spiritual ideas brought in by Plato, we've got to know that he was also very concerned about somewhat the afterlife. He really understood ourselves as this, the complexity, the multidimensional part of ourselves, and considering that we also may experience consequences of our choices in the realm of the afterlife. Is that right?
Absolutely, and it was reading Plato in 1962 that really did wake me up to the fact that the question of life after death is the biggest mystery of human existence. Before then, I had not been raised religious, and I had never thought about the notion of an afterlife until I read about it in Plato, and Plato absolutely convinced me that this question is the most important mystery of existence. And Plato almost implied that we're hardly even human unless we think about this question and really push it and really try to get the very best opinion that we can about it. And he justly pointed out, I think, that everything else kind of revolves in one way around that question. If we make it out of here alive, then we better pay a lot of attention to that fact and try to figure out what the significance of our life here is. And I think, in all honesty, that in terms of people who have looked at this from a rational point of view, from a purely rational point of view, Plato is the beginning point for anybody who wants to study this question, because I think he talked about it in a lot more sophisticated ways than we do even today usually.
And when we talk about these ideas, we also got to know that both Socrates and Plato, for them there was no question that there was God, higher mind, if we may say this way, and they also got to the idea that each one of us were assigned with what they call the daimon, like as you were talking before, this like a guardian angel idea, like a spirit guide that even in the afterlife is going to come back and help us figure out the ways in the afterlife.
That's very interesting, very apropos, and there's one little section in Plato's Phaedo where he says exactly that. He says that there are many different pathways in the afterlife world. He said it's not a simple situation, and there are different roads and different paths that people can take and so on. And he very plainly regarded knowledge as an entree point to the afterlife. He said that the most important kind of life that a human being can live is one in pursuit of wisdom and knowledge, and a thorough commitment to living a virtuous life, a life in accordance with the principles of justice and virtue toward ourselves and toward our fellow human beings. He was a very highly moral person in that sense. And so to Plato, I think the idea of separating the intellectual quest from the spiritual quest would just be unthinkable. To him, they were really one and the same.
It's quite fascinating, because you're talking about this sense of ethics, this sense of being virtuous, and as you said before, at the very beginning, probably very striking information for people who have never heard that he was a professional wrestler, different from the wrestlers of today, of course, in a more Olympian sense of the word, very athletic. Do you think also the ideas that Plato brought about, the respect for the body, but not focusing on the materialistic part of caring for the body, caring enough so we can sustain our life, also comes from, is that idea that he provides to us coming from his own experience as an athlete?
Oh, I think it definitely is. And he said the most important thing is the intellect or the mind. And he said that that the body he compared to a coat or a vehicle or a prison. He said, Plato said at one point, he said the body is the prison of the soul, or the jailhouse of the soul, that we are kind of embedded in this body which leads us astray and leads us into temptations and to all sorts of things, and that so we have to sort of make a conscious effort to override the body and to keep ourselves focused on the world beyond and the realm of the forms, the world that we can only know by our intellect and not through our senses. And at the same time, yes, there is the obligation to care for our body. And, for example, in his dialogue, The Crito, Crito. He says that it's our bodies in effect belong to God, and it's not our place to take our own lives by suicide, for example. So there is that obligation to the body, and yet that the self is the soul. He identifies the person with the soul and not with the body, and he was obviously convinced that your soul goes through many incarnations, is born again into many bodies.
That's quite interesting. And there is also the idea that he brought to us on this, as you're talking about being truly virtuous and the sense of ethical, moral attitude before life, the sense of respect for life, he goes to the climax of it when he talks about universal love as a law of nature. And there's even a quote from Plato and then Socrates in the Gospel According to Spiritism, as Kardec places it: love is neither a god nor a mortal, but a great daemon, or daemon, as they say.
Yes, a daemon, or a spirit.
A spirit.
Love had a profound place in Plato's dialogues, and there's numerous dialogues in which he discusses this the notion of love at length. And perhaps the most important of these dialogues is his dialogue, The Symposium, which is thoroughly explores this notion of love and its profound connection to the spiritual life of humankind.
And in this search for wisdom, did Plato also find as much criticism as Socrates, his master?
Well, I think it was a different sort of circumstance, really, and that, yes, Plato had his detractors and so on, and yet, as far as we know, he never got into the situation of being threatened with execution there in Athens. He tried to to take his political philosophy away from Athens, and he met an autocrat down in Sicily and Plato had high hopes of going down there and creating an ideal republic. And during that time, he almost was killed, but and so in his foreign adventures, he came close to being executed. But in his life there in Athens, I think with his social prominence and his family going back so many centuries and so on, I think he was, I don't think he really was in danger in Athens. But, and so in that sense, he had a different life than Socrates. I gather, too, and this is only Raymond Moody's impression, but it comes from, almost 50 years now of constantly reading and rereading these texts, but I suspect that Socrates was a somewhat more abrasive person than Plato, and that Plato, just obviously had the gift of gab and good relationships with people, whereas Socrates was, I gather, a somewhat more annoying and upfront kind of character. So I think maybe their personality differences had a bit to do with this, too.
Oh, that's quite interesting. And Dr. Moody, we are always so delighted to hear your teachings, and time is coming up for us to wrap up the show. What would be one of the main highlights for you in your deep studies about Plato in regard to the spiritual ideas that he brought forth?
Well, I think to me it's that I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in afterlife research is that many of the people in this kind of research are people who were not really very familiar with the classics, and so their ideas about researching these things began relatively recently in history, after we already had the scientific method developed. And I think that just as your holy writings indicate, that the real inspiration for us in this kind of study should be Plato. His ideas are still very strong and very powerful, and I think the best set of ideas from the purely rational point of view that have been ever articulated in an attempt to wrestle with this question.
Dr. Moody, we will now do our homework. As we will read more, and especially in your book that was just released, The Paranormal, and hopefully as soon as we get, our homework done, we'll send you certainly another invitation to come back and talk to our listeners.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
About
looking forward to it.
So thank you so much for being with us at Kardec Radio today, and we hope to learn more from you in the very near future.
Oh, this has just been delightful, and thank you so much again, and thanks to our listeners.
All right. So, dear listener, now we are going to give you a Spiritist Moment segment to learn more about Socrates, the master of Plato, and also the Spiritism in your life, in which we're going to talk about the concept that Plato brought to us on this sense of virtuous life. Let us listen to this, and then when we come back, we're going to wrap up the show in the highest tone of inspiration.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners. I am Kirsten DeMello, and this is a Spiritist Moment. Today we're going to be discussing about Socrates and Plato. And on today's show, for sure at this point, we've discussed a lot about Plato and perhaps even Socrates. But who are Socrates and Plato from a Spiritist perspective? Well, we learn with Allan Kardec in the Gospel According to Spiritism in the introduction. We learn about who was Socrates, and we learn that Socrates is one of the precursors or the forerunners of Christianity and of Spiritism. And we can go as far as even saying that they might have planted the seed, or indeed they did plant the seed, or even more so, they plowed the soil for other workers of this universal truth to plant seeds in preparation for when Christ came and all great minds before Christ and after. And one other interesting reflections we can think about when we discuss Socrates and Plato and many forerunners of the Christian ideas and Spiritism is that we see the universality in these thoughts, that we don't look to Spiritism and that's it. We don't see any other perspective. But when we look at Buddhism, Hinduism, and other types of religion, we see the points in which we connect, and that's what Spiritism teaches us. We look at the universal truths that bind us to one another, that bring us close together. We don't look at what makes us different, and that is the beauty about Spiritism. One of the many beautiful things about Spiritism is this ability to bring people together from all different walks of life. So when we talk about Socrates and Plato being forerunners, truly they were in this universal thought of unification of all peoples from all walks of life. The ability to see in others something similar within myself that doesn't separate us, that brings us closer. Because oftentimes religion can separate people, and that's not what it's intended to be. It's intended to bring peace and understanding, and not separation and anger. So to help illustrate this universality that Socrates had, let us illustrate a case for you and share it with you. And the case goes like this. In ancient Greece, Socrates was reputed to hold knowledge in high esteem. One day an acquaintance met the great philosopher and said, "Do you know what I just heard about your friend?" And Socrates would say, "Hold on a minute. Before telling me anything, I'd like you to pass a little test It's called the 3 filters test. 3 filters? His friend said. That's right, Socrates continued. Before you talk to me about my friend, it might be a good idea to take a moment and filter what you're going to say. That's why I call it the 3 filters test. The first filter is truth. Have you made absolutely sure that what you're about to tell me is true? No, said the man. Actually, I just heard about it and... All right, said Socrates. So you don't really know if it's true or not. Well, okay, no. Now let's try the second filter, the filter of goodness. Is what you're about to tell me about my friend something good? No, on the contrary. So, Socrates continued, you want to tell me something bad about him, but you're not even certain it's true. You may still pass the third test, because there's one filter left, the filter of usefulness. Is what you want to tell me about my friend going to be useful to me? No, not really. Well, concluded Socrates, if what you want to tell me is neither true nor good nor even useful, why tell it to me at all? And this is why Socrates truly was a great philosopher and truly held in high esteem. So we see this universality of truth because we learn a lot with Joan de Angelis, the spirit guide of Divaldo Pereira Franco, when we learn that we are an example for someone in our lives, all the good and negative that we do, and that our words and our thoughts have a great impact on others, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. This is a truth. We learn about the power of our thoughts, the power of our mind, and the power of the spoken word. We see here that Socrates' words are very true. This is truly the precursor, the forerunner of Spiritism here and the Spiritist ideas. So these are just some of the thoughts we ask that you reflect with. And as always, we encourage you to go and read the books of Kardec yourself, especially the Gospel According to Spiritism and the introduction where he talks about Socrates and Plato. So, dear friends, as always, we encourage you to reflect more on your own inner being with these thoughts and other more edifying thoughts as well. And I am Kirsten DeMello, and this is the Spiritist Moment.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listener. Welcome to the segment Spiritism in Your Life. Today we're going to talk about moral hypocrisy. More specifically, the tendency among people to judge others more severely than they judge themselves. This idea was also mentioned by Plato, as we can find in the introduction of the Gospel According to Spiritism, section number 4, item number 18, which says, the natural disposition shown by all is to perceive our defects far less than we see those of others. And if you carefully read this, you will realize that this is exactly what Jesus brought to us in many different passages in the Gospel. As an example, Matthew wrote, you see the mote that is in the eye of your neighbor, but you do not see the beam that is in your own eye. And again, there are many other passages in the Gospel that brings the exact same idea. We can certainly find this idea in other religious traditions, and also in current scientific research, where we can find thousands of papers trying to understand and explain this attitude. One example of this behavior can be seen in a paper by Stano et al. Participants were asked to assign 2 tests, one from himself and one for another participant. One task was easy and short, the other one was difficult and boring. Most participants assigned the easy, short task for themselves and the boring task for the other candidates. Another group of participants was just observing other candidates making the decision. In the end, the group of participants that was giving themselves the easy task considered that to be fair, while the group of participants that was observing other candidates giving themselves the easy task considered that not to be fair. It is part of our human nature, in this stage of evolution, to analyze and judge other people's acts or defects. We tend to close our eyes for our own mistakes and our own judgments and our own actions. So we need a moment to think about this and do a contemporary psychological analysis of this matter. Many of us are trained since early childhood to suppress or ignore our own feelings, emotions, and by doing that, we also learn to ignore our own problems or to overlook them. When we grow up now, we are afraid and scared of analyzing who we really are. And when all that is combined, we actually start to project all those problems that we have inside us onto other people. And now every single thing that happens around us is going to be severely judged and criminalized because we're basically finding an escape route to all those problems that are so embedded into ourselves. Think about another possibility. When is it okay, or is it okay for me to reprehend someone that is doing something wrong? Especially because we live in a society, and in many instances, we have to take actions. In order to help us answer this question, we're going to go back to the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 10, where Allan Kardec asked the spirit of St. Louis, number 19, as no one is perfect, does it follow that no one has the right to reprehend their neighbor? And St. Louis answers, this is certainly not the right conclusion to arrive at, since that each one of you must work for the progress of everyone, and above all, especially for those who have been placed in your care. But for this very reason, it should be done in moderation in order to obtain a useful end, and not, as is so often the case, for the mere pleasure of reviling. In this event, the reprehension would be weakness, whereas in the previous instant, it is a duty demanded by charity, which must be accomplished with all possible care. For the rest, the censure that is made of others should also be directed at oneself, so trying to find out if you too are not deserving of the same reprimand. In other words, my friends, when you want to criticize someone, first you need to, number one, analyze your own feelings, your own actions, and make sure that you're not only projecting your own problems into that situation. Number two, you should ask yourself, am I helping this person? Am I sharing love and charity? Number three, analyze the situation carefully, trying to understand why is the other person doing that. If you answer to these 3 points and you're convinced that by doing that you are indeed helping a brother, so that's the time when you have to take action with love. That's the most important thing. My dear friends, let us remember always the messages brought to us by illuminated spirits like Plato, our Master Jesus, and so many others. And let's love one another. God bless us.
Dear listener, we are rejoiced with the show today. We learned so much about Plato, his spiritual ideas, and for those who are studying Spiritism, let us remember, Plato is one of the spirits who joined the Spiritist codification team and brought it to us. So we need to study more about him, get to know who he is, to get inspired to change our lives, because after all, Spiritism is here to destroy materialism. Life goes on and we live again and again and again, and we always progress. By the way, you want to know more about this sense of honoring life? Come to the Spirit Society of Baltimore tonight. At 6 p.m., we're going to have a special forum and 4 speakers to talk about abortion, euthanasia, capital punishment, and also the idea that life is more than the physical body. We're going to talk about these ideas that stay with us in our hearts, respecting, caring for the body, and also for the soul. Talking about caring for the body and the soul. Next week, we have a most special program as well. It's about caring for the body, eating disorders, with Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross, who wrote the book Healing Body, Mind, and Spirit. Much of what she says and proposes as a doctor are solutions for people who are experiencing eating disorders. How many of us, if not ourselves, are the ones that we know need help in that regard? And to wrap up the show today, would like to invite you for a special prayerful moment, because Kardec Radio is here to nourish your soul. And as we nourish our souls, let us go to section 24 of the chapter 28 in the Gospel According to Spiritism, when Allan Kardec teaches us what to do when we need to ask for advice. He says, whenever we are unsure about doing or not doing something, we should, before anything else, ask ourselves the following questions. Can the thing I'm hesitant to do cause harm to someone else? Might it be useful to someone? If someone else were to do it to me, would I be happy about it? If the matter has to do with only yourself, then we should balance the sum of the personal advantages and disadvantages that may result from it. So, dear listener, let us pray now with Allan Kardec in this search for advice for the questions and doubts that we have in our minds. In the name of the Almighty God, we ask the good spirits watching over us to inspire us to make the best decisions in the certainty in which we find ourselves. Direct our thoughts to the good and divert the influence of those who would tempt us off the path. We thank you, dear Lord, for the show today, and we ask you to bless always, in the greatest gratitude we have in our hearts, Dr. Raymond Moody Jr., his pioneering mind, and also all of our listeners throughout the world, and all of us. Dear listener, come back in a week, and we have a lot more to share with you with Dr. Ross and her beautiful perspective on how to overcome eating disorders. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.